According to some reporter, the move of the formation of a new government of national unity, particularly with the main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, has made mixed reactions across South Africa. Some have welcomed the move, while others, especially political parties, including the MK of former President Jacob Zuma, and we also saw the Julius Malema of the Economic Freedom Fighters, and other pundits are slamming this coalition government, terming it senseless and baseless, patterning the last development that occurred during the 7th Parliament. So today on Global Insight, we want to analyze the feasibility of this coalition government in South Africa, looking at the major stakes at the national level, as well as how this coalition government, particularly with the Democratic Alliance, will affect South Africa's international politics. You are most welcome again. And time for us, of course, to note that we are being joined today by a panel of experts, particularly we have Dr. Professor GABILA NUBONG, who is an political economist, Cameroonian, but joining us live from South Africa. Hello to you, Professor NUBONG, and thanks for making it count this day.
Thanks so much, Clarice. Good evening to you. Good evening to my fellow panelists. Good evening to your viewers and the listeners. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm particularly happy to share this platform with very esteemed co-panelists to discuss this very topical issue on the South African elections. I think that it's a victory for democracy. It's a victory for African democracy, but comes with so much uncertainty that I'm sure we will be unpacking as we get along with this today's session. But thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for accepting to do this with us. It's a victory for democracy, yet there is still so much uncertainty. Now we remain in South Africa with Mr. IZAK KHOMO, a freelance journalist who also doubles as a fair program SURA Africa. Hello to you, sir, and thanks for gracing our panel this day.
Well, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. How are you, ma'am? And how are you to our listeners, and how to everybody? And thanks for having me on the panel. Very interesting topic, and I think we shall do justice to it. Thank you.
Thank you also for accepting to share your own insight on the latest development, characterizing particularly the political scene in South Africa. Let's move now to Ghana, acknowledging the presence of FIDEL OWUSU, an international relations expert, also security analyst. Thanks for joining us this day, FIDEL. Please, can you try to on your mic? We cannot hear you.
Yes, sorry about that. Thank you for having me, madam. And good afternoon to my co-panelists, esteemed co-panelists and viewers. Thank you.
Thank you for making it count this day, ladies and gentlemen. We continue with our discursive program, and we right away with you, Professor NUBONG. We are looking at the coalition government already in place in South Africa, but then we ask a question of what lies ahead for the, the parliament in South Africa, what lies ahead for the governance system in South Africa. So what will this coalition government mean for South Africa, particularly this time around that it's already meeting resistance from Jacob Zuma and likes like Julius Malema, among others?
Well, Clarice, I think the shortest answer to that question is that none of us really knows what to expect out of this coalition. It produces a mixed feelings from a variety of stakeholders in the society, depending on who you talk to. And it's just that, because it's a multi-party coalition, that it brings together parties with such divergent ideologies. Comrade KHOMO is going to bear me witness to say 2-3 weeks ago, when each of these people were involved in the elections, they almost were at each other's throat, you know. So Clarissa of IFP, in his conversation with, when he talked about the DA and their Moon Pact coalition that they had set up prior to the election, it was not in very kind terms. And then you have the PA, the Patriotic Alliance of Gaten Mackenzie, that was very hard on the DA prior to the elections. And of course, it has been the hallmark of the DA to save South Africa. They ran a campaign on a Renew South Africa, Save South Africa ticket. And one of the people from whom they were supposed to save South Africa was the ANC, the same ANC into whom they have gone into a coalition for governance. So ideologically, they are bringing together a group of parties that could not be more divergent than it is. There's a sense in which, yes, the ANC as an organization in itself is a party at war with itself, ideologically and literally in terms of the political contestation between various factions. And the alignment that President Cyril has and the ANC has made with the DA and the other parties, and I pick my words carefully when I say the DA and the other parties, because in the current coalition, the DA is the kingmaker in this instance. And that's the one part that bothers me. So the combination of all the different parties together takes them up to about 268 seats in parliament. And of those 268 seats, the DA alone has about 88, if my numbers serve me right, if I remember correctly. So the current coalition is current configuration, and that's the biggest of my concern as an individual. The current coalition in its current configuration stands or falls depending on what the DA chooses to do. In other words, if the DA decides to pull out of the coalition, it collapses immediately. You cannot say so for the other three parties that are currently in the coalition. So it's a coalition that stands on the strength of what the DA decides needs to happen with this coalition. And the question that bothers me, and I'm sure bothers most people, is that what is the DA going to get in return? Because it has literally been the one that has returned President Cyril back to the presidency based on the game of numbers. And the concern then becomes, if you would, one, in the season of desperation, not go to parties with whom you are at least ideologically aligned, because when you talk about the mass democratic movement, there are parties that ideologically are more aligned with the ANC than the DA, particularly the MK and the EFF, in terms of, besides the fact that they share a common history and they are comrades that have fought together, their manifestos in its current configuration make lots of things that are aligned. For example, land expropriation, I speak under correction, it's a resolution of an ANC conference. You know, the issue that the parties like the EFF are putting on the table have been decisions that have been taken on previous ANC conferences. It's a policy position that, albeit the government of the ANC has been taking time to implement. But when you look at the ideological disposition of the DA into wanting to set a market liberal, democratic, private sector driven against affirmative action and all the different things that seek to redress the injustices of the past, there could not be two parties that are further apart ideologically. And yes, they do not want us to make us believe that they found each other in 10 days, in 1 week. That ideologies that have been built into political parties that are decades old were certainly reconciled in 7 days. Yeah. So that is conversation for the gallery. That is for the news headlines, because those were ideologies that were built and incarnate in people's fundamental belief system. So how do you get such diametrical opposed people to form a government and work together? It's something that we are all looking forward to see and hoping that it somehow works. I know that policy positions of a country like South Africa don't change radically overnight. So there's going to be a lot of continuity. There's going to be a lot of continuity in their foreign policy positions, a lot of continuity in the way public finance is handled, public finance management. There's going to be a lot of continuity in terms of local government and municipalities, and the way they have conducted business in the last 30 years. That's not going to drastically change overnight. Absolutely. Efficiency will be built into the system because you have a coalition government that comes from people from different backgrounds. It will be assumingly more difficult for a culture of corruption to be prevalent in certain government departments because of greater oversight. Those are some of the benefits that we are hoping to get. But whether this would make for stability and improvement of the life of the average person, it remains to be seen. And we are all keeping our fingers crossed to see what will be the outcome of what they have decided to put together.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Professor NUBONG. That's where the bone of contention lies, but it's still too early to judge. In the same perspective with you, Mr. IZAK, you know, while Professor NUBONG was talking earlier on, he actually highlighted point that brings us to how to understanding how ambiguous or how complex the situation seems to be now in South Africa, given the time frame that these countries or these political parties, particular ANC and the DA took to arrive a compromise pertaining the coalition. So the question is, can this coalition government now solve the existing disparities between, you know, the white and black South Africans, you know, looking at the, you know, the white supremacy and the black minority ideology? And we know that Julius Malema highlighted this while decrying the formation of the coalition between the ANC and particularly with the DA.
Thank you for having me. Thank you, and thank you also for posing that question. But one thing I'd like to say is this, that I would like to differ with Prof. NUBONG in many things. I think he has overplayed or he has overemphasized the difference, the ideological difference between the DA and the ANC. The ANC and the DA basically, if we look at it, to cut the whole story short, I would just say that the DA basically, it is a center-right party. The ANC was a center-left party. Just a minute. The ANC was a center-left party, and they were very close together.
Yeah.
The ANC, basically its ideology, it is based and it is grounded in the same ideology of the DA, which is basically the neoliberal economic dispensation. There is no difference from that. The ANC believes in the private sector taking the initiative and also taking over the economy, which is what's happening. It has been happening from the time of Mandela. They privatize all industries. The only place where they differ in the sense that one is saying the other that I'm a better administrator, I'm less corrupt. That's the DA. Yeah. Otherwise, they agree on each and everything as far as the economy is concerned and other things. And so basically, those people, they're bedfellows. It's only that the difference between the ANC and the DA is the legacy of apartheid, where there is still a very big feeling amongst blacks that basically the time for whites to rule, it is not yet there. And again, the blacks as they are, they want to have more radical changes. Now the big thing is this, that the difference in ideology was present within the ANC. Within the ANC, there was a very big fight between the more right-wing, which is headed by Ramaphosa, and another left-wing sector, which they call themselves the rapid economic transformation sector. Now there you find that the rapid transformation sector, it has been purged. It has been purged gradually to a point that even now that they've been actually kicked out where they formed the MK. The EFF was also part of the ANC. Now this where they differ, it is an ideological difference within the ANC, not with the ANC proper and the DA, but within the ANC, whereby issues of land dispensations to blacks was being actually debated. But that has been solving in the sense that the people who are in charge of the ANC, they do not differ much with what the DA or with what white South Africa, the views of white South Africa as far as the land is concerned. The land issue and the dispensation as far as restitution, it will remain just where it is. The Malemas and the majority of South Africans won't get the type of solutions that they want. because the ANC of Ramaphosa is actually intent in keeping the situation as it is. And again, with the economy, they've both agreed the mining sector is in the hands of what they call the white monopoly capitalists, where Ramaphosa is part and parcel. And that is where the DA is. So basically, the DA, as it is, and the ANC of Ramaphosa, these were bedfellows. People knew that from long ago, from 2017. People knew that people were bedfellows. But things have been very easy for Ramaphosa now that the left-wing elements within the ANC, they've been purged, and they've purged themselves.
Thank you for that, Mr. IZAK. We continue to understand the narratives across South Africa to Ghana now with Fidel. In the same perspective, we are looking at a coalition that has already been formed, and we are seeing resistance from political actors. But then, in spite of the fact that we have, ambiguity, or the coalition remains complex, given that major decisions haven't yet been taken. Let's come back to the raison d'etre as to maybe why Jacob Zuma and Julius Malema, among others, can be contesting or revolting the already existing coalition. Across Africa, there is always a debater where, looking at the place of political rhetorics and the interest of the population, where political rhetoric sometimes overshadows the interest of citizens. Can we talk of this aspect in South African coalition at this particular moment?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I would like to say that in other parts of Africa, or many parts of Africa, people do not understand what is happening in South Africa. So my two eminent scholars who have spoken did not really explain what is happening, but they answered the question, and it has really enlightened some of us who are outside the country. And if I say that, I mean the multi-party democracy practice in South Africa. That's what people want to understand. When this thing was unfolding, I wrote an article and I tried to explain what is proportional representation as opposed to majoritarian democracy. And that is something that people in Ghana want to understand, because in Ghana, people vote for individuals and they don't vote for parties per se. In Nigeria, that's what happens. In Cameroon, we have majoritarian system. But in South Africa, we have what is called the proportional system. So it means that in South Africa, votes are not wasted. It means you can get some votes from KwaZulu-Natal, some from Johannesburg and other places, but at the end of the day, they are all counted, and the percentage you will get is what you will have in parliament. And so by this, it means in South Africa, you don't necessarily need a specific stronghold to be in parliament. A party that is able to gather enough percentage across the country can sit in parliament. And that is very important. From that, I would say that what we have currently in South Africa is what the people who sat down in 1994 were expecting to happen. Now, we had majoritarian system, which could have been very convenient for the ANC in 1994, but that's not what happened. The negotiation that happened ensured that the multi-party proportional party list system was what was going to be good for the future of South Africa. And after 30 years, what they were thinking is what has unraveled, or what is happening. Because if South Africa had used the majoritarian system, it would have been difficult for this coalition to happen. Because then we will go for runoff, and at best, what the ANC will do is to talk to one party who joins in the ANC, and then they run for elections, and then you get 50 plus 1%, and then you form government. Yeah. But currently, coalition is what has happened. And coalition means people trying to compromise, people talking, ideologies being married, ideas being interaction of ideas, and coming out with the best possible option. So after 30 years, the main reason for the Constitution of South Africa is what we are seeing. Over the years, it has just been ANC dominating. But the interesting thing is that it was due to the implosion within the ANC that has given birth to the actual multi-party democracy or the proportional system that we see in Italy, that we see in Germany, and that we see in Israel. In all these countries that I've mentioned, it is very difficult for one party to get 50% and over in an election. You have, at best, you go 35, and you have to form a coalition. So if you've heard about the German politician known as Angela Merkel, the former chancellor, she is one of the masters of coalition government, talking to the opposition to sit down. During her term, you find the Christian Democrats finding common grounds with the Social Democrats. That is the SPD and CDU forming a coalition. In fact, these are the main parties who do not see ideologically eye to eye, but they were able to form a coalition under Angela Merkel, and things moved. And so far, she's been one of the longest serving chancellors in German history. Absolutely. And she was able to handle that. That is what South Africa needs. For me, the radicals, as the previous, Mr. Nkomo mentioned, the radicals within the ANC have now shifted to be opposition. And I will side with the Prof in saying that, look, whatever that is happening is likely to reduce some of the excesses that the ANC that characterized the ANC. The corruption, the taking people for granted, and the master of all you surveyed, that is going to end. Because the DA is going to be a check. There's always going to be that threat of withdrawing from the coalition. And when you withdrew from the coalition, it meant that the government had come to an end. And that threat, that legitimate threat, will make people more accountable in South Africa. Already, as the previous speaker said, they are all centrist. ANC centered to the left, DA centered to the right. They will have to talk on a lot of things. There are a lot of things, despite the two of them being at the center, there are a lot of things they disagree on. And that discussion is going to benefit South Africans. It's going to ensure transparency. It's going to ensure accountability. And in many ways, it is going to do a lot to show the outcome or to give the outcome of the next general elections. Now, Mr. Ramaphosa is not going to see himself as the leader of ANC. He is more going to see himself as the leader of South Africa. The reason is that previously, the other leaders like Zuma and Mbeki could not finish their second term because of internal wrangling in the ANC, and not because South Africans did not want them. That is very important. So that internal wrangling has ultimately led to a coalition that in itself going to be a check on the monopoly of the ANC over the past 3 decades. So all in all, this coalition served the people of South Africa better, in that they are going to have politicians who are more accountable and who are more responsive. Then maybe we'll go to the regional levels, because South Africa is also more, decentralized in terms of its politics. So the regional level combinations are also supposed to be watched, because as a decentralized country, then you need more accountability at that grassroots level in order to see a reflection thereof at the national levels. Sure. So this is my preliminary statement on this issue, and as we go on, I would say further. Thank you.
Thank you, of course, for that, Fidel. Coming back to you, Dr. Professor NUBONG, I beg your pardon. We want to continue, looking at the viewpoint shared by Mr. IZAK and FIDEL pertaining the development in South Africa, do you actually align with the proposition that this coalition government is what South Africa needs at the moment? I'll bring back the question of looking at how, political rhetorics. FIDEL said that for a coalition to happen, we need a compromise, we need understanding and collaboration. In this aspect now, it's bringing us to some pundits saying the coalition was largely seen to protecting the political interest of Cyril Ramaphosa rather than looking at the fate of the country. How, feasible is this assertion?
Well, I would struggle
Professor
to
NUBONG?
buy into. Can you hear me?
Sure, I can hear you now.
Yes, Clarice, I would struggle to buy into the view of those who want to argue that that is what the country needs. In terms of the construction of a non-racial society, a society that is governed by its best brains and best skills, in terms of the argument that says, let's get who is capable for the job to be involved in the management of the country, and let's not allow previous considerations about the past to limit who gets the responsibility to manage what government department. If it's just a question of let us deploy the best into the best positions to help manage the country, then yes, you can argue that that's what the country needs. Again, whereas what would you consider the best in this instance, politically speaking? Now, South Africa as a country for the last 30 years is characterized by one thing. In terms of policy formulation, in terms of its ability to identify its challenges and designate interventions to resolve them, it's been top-notch. Personally, as someone who is interested in a range of the policy questions, especially the economic policy questions, we are not one of those countries that struggle with finding what our challenges are and designing interventions to resolve them. We may have capacity issues in terms of the efficiency of the public sector. We may have skills issues in terms of an adequate threshold to address certain challenges. And of course, we have lots of political questions. So I struggle to, for anyone who is down here, understands the inner workings of the daily politics and understand the issues that the country is having to deal with and has had to do for the last 30 years, would be cautiously optimistic, if not outrightly pessimistic. Cautiously optimistic because I'm personally of the view that in terms of the formation of a stable entity that is going to drive the management of the country, I would have rather not have a five-party coalition to try and put together a team that would run the country. For various reasons. A five-party coalition just says that you just need to find consensus among a larger number of people. Yeah. A five-party plus coalition essentially just says that people would have to weld in their relative strength and powers in terms of how they drive the direction of the coalition. Mm-hmm. There was a sense, notwithstanding all the challenges of the past, there was a sense in which, from a democratic centralism perspective, Lutuli House identified policy priorities, deployed executive to go and implement, and took directives from a sort of a centralized base in order to determine the direction of the country. Yeah. I am of the view that that is more consistent and it is more stable than the current status quo, because we now have a scenario where policy priorities will not only be determined at the level of Lutuli House, which is something that we have not had for the last 30 years. It's our first time we're wading into these waters. And then, very interestingly and somehow very dangerously, we are really banking on the genius of one individual, a president, in order to drive that process. Yes, he's going to consult with his comrades. And yes, we know that that whole entity has had instabilities of the past, and that the faction that has emerged as Comrade KHOMO has presented seems to be the faction that is more right-wing leaning. But we do know that these are associations of convenience. I'm of the view that the deputy president, the national spokesperson, is just a good, they are both just good politicians. They are going to have successful, striving, prosperous careers with the left as they are currently doing with the right. They just did a discounting of their options and decided to realize that for where they're currently positioned, going along with the flow is going to work them well. If this coalition doesn't work, and I think that KHOMO is going to bear me witness in this, Gwede Mantashe and Paul Mashatile are going to be among the top 2 entities that will lead the charge to ask the president. These two entities, leaders of the top 6 of the ANC have a peculiar history of having, in the last 2-3 administrations, having been key players at strategic moments. When Mbeki was recalled, when Zuma was recalled, and somehow, although not occupying the position they currently occupy, they somehow have always succeeded to navigate their way through to be in the center of power. I don't think that they have any specific loyalty to President Ramaphosa. I think that they are loyal to the ANC and they are loyal to themselves. I think there is something about the heart of the ANC that feels like it's beating itself. This elections is the first time the ANC has gone below 50%, has come to 40%. And somewhere, there's a video clip somewhere in the National Electoral Center, there's a video clip of the national chairperson of the ANC, Gwede Mantashe, making a comment to the effect of he was going to call a meeting of the mass democratic movement, you know, they like calling themselves National Democratic Movement, which goes back into the shared identity that they come from the days of struggle and apartheid. And that was his comment. That was his comment on the night of the elections. And he was making that comment to Floyd Shibambu, I think, if I'm not mistaken. He was making that comment to the EFF. So there are very strong voices within the ANC and within the veterans of the ANC that are of the view that, no, guys, we need to close ranks. We need to stop this fighting. We need to find ourselves. We were in the trenches together. We were in the jail cells together. We fought for this country. We fought for this liberation. We cannot find ourselves in a space where we are fighting against each other openly to the point of losing power and handing over governance to the children of the National Party, even though they don't like calling themselves that. And that's very strong within sentiments in certain segments in South Africa. I personally have the view that that sentiment, you cannot wish it away. I don't think it's going to go away. I'm personally of the view that between now and December, that sentiment is going to prevail over the government of national unity. That's my personal predictions. That the sense of, no, this is a country that we fought, we shed blood, people died for us to govern, and no matter how much we disagree with each other, we cannot find ourselves in a space where we prefer to work with the DA, I don't want to categorize or qualify them, than working with each other. And the one individual that would facilitate that conversation is President Cyril Ramaphosa not being in the picture. If President Cyril is not in the picture, Tikile Mbalula, Paul Mashatile, Gwede Mantashe, and almost any other name you can name in the ANC can swap quotes and talk the radical left language, and you will not believe that these are the same people that talk about government national unity. That is my perspective of where I think this is going to end up. Now, all of that is going to depend on 2 critical factors, in my sense. The cabinet that President Cyril is going to put together now, for the very first time in 30 years, and it's really something to look out for, because the entities in the ANC that have been used to governance for the last 30 years have never found themselves in a position where they were openly challenged, or they would be openly challenged about the way they govern, about key decisions about the orientation of the country. And for the very first time, President Cyril is leading that whole group of people into a space where they would have people of the DA and people of the opposition that are South Africans like everybody else and are as much entitled to governance as everybody else, asking tough questions. How are they going to take that? With the arrogance of the incumbency for the last 30 years, I think it's going to come with a lot of instability. I don't think that the coalition government is going to last 6 months. That's my personal view. And the minute it doesn't last 6 months, because of the newness of the terrain and the ANC having to get used to depending on other people to make decisions, there are a lot of people that will be willing to drop the hat and to reconsolidate with their old comrades. That's my sense. And then finally on that, Clarice, is I personally do not believe that the DA is a party that can co-govern anything with anybody. I think that the DA is a party that is consistent to it does not, I'm trying to find my words carefully. The DA believes in itself. The DA is a party that in its disposition, when it approaches critical decisions, it's either its way or the highway. Absolutely. I think the DA is going to collapse the GNU. That's my prediction. Because they're not loyal to anybody apart from themselves. Now, what are the factors that make for that to be a heightened possibility? Because the questions of corruption, President Cyril Ramaphosa, for example, has questions to answer around the investigations that was happening around his farm, the Palapala incident. Sure. And that had come to the incident, had come to the parliament when the ANC had majority in the parliament, and the ANC had the ANC had crushed it. Now, the DA strives itself on being a government that seeks to promote an anti-corruption agenda. All the other angry other parties are going to put that question back on the table. It's just a matter of time. I don't think it's going to last us 3 months. Okay. Palapala is going to come back to the table, and they will be going for impeachment. And the DA would have the option to either choose to protect the president over his corruption allegations or stand on principle and fight corruption. If it stands on principle to fight corruption, it would have to vote with those who choose to impeach the president.
Absolutely.
Okay. And if it chooses to vote with those who choose to impeach the president, that would be the end of the GNU. Because outside of President Cyril Ramaphosa, I don't see any other member of the ANC that will be willing to co-govern in the government of national unity with the DA. So it's going to be a very interesting possibility. And if they choose to protect the president, it is going to be a huge damage on their brand as an anti-corruption party. So for me, it's just, by the time we get to Christmas, we'll be talking about a different government, in my opinion.
You know, this actually shows that the stakes are high in South Africa as we continue to watch what unfolds and the next decisions that are being taken. Coming back to you, Mr. IZAK KHOMO, we are looking at the complexities of the coalition and how political interests might infringe the ideologies or the goals set by the government of national unity. Let's bring us now to how consistency of policy can play a crucial role in trying to, reshape constitutions and enforce the rule of law, and also, check some of these differences that could further undermine the democracy in South Africa.
Well, sorry, I did not get you properly because the thing was unstable. But if I get you right, you want to be inquiring about it. Can you just come back and just finish off what you're saying? I did not get you.
Okay, we are looking at the complexities. We are looking at the complexities of, Professor NUBONG highlighted, and how we can use the aspect of consistency policy to actually check or shape the constitutions and ensure that the rule of law stands as we watch the government of national unity and the major decisions that they may take in the coming days or months.
Okay, thank you. Well, basically, issues of the constitutionality of the government or running the country, it will be there. They've gone past that stage whereby anybody can go and play around with the constitution. That in there is there. There's been nobody who's going to be able to come and disturb that. Although there are people who are actually looking at the judiciary, saying that the judiciary has actually become politicized, but that's not a very big issue right now. It could be an issue maybe after some 10, 15 years, but not at the present moment. So basically, the constitutionality or the stability of governments in South Africa it is guaranteed. The democratic system, as they say it will be there. But the issue now is this, that will these governments be able to deliver toward the people's expectation? Now, those are the very big questions. Right now, the African masses, the expectation has not been met in the last 30 years. They've been expecting that certain issues would be addressed. Certain issues as far as access to economic empowerment, economic development, they've not been met. And again, there's a very serious issues of economic and social justice. Those things have not been met. Now, with the policies or with the stance of the government, of the ANC, they never had anything which could actually come and deliver or address that issues of economic and social justice. Now those issues, they will become the key points, key political and ideological issues which are going to drive the majority of South Africans. When I say the majority of South Africans, I'm not talking about the middle class. Yeah, I'm talking about the lower classes, the rural ANC, rural black South Africans, and the marginalized, urbanized South Africans. Now their issues, they are going to put their agenda, but that will take another 10 years. And when that comes, I think the ANC then will actually be totally voted out of power. Right now, we find that the ANC are losing power. It is not because of the DA has become very powerful. The DA vote has been just what it was from the day that it was formed. This is a vote basically which is made up of the whites and a group of people whom they call the colored. Yeah. And it has not increased anyway. The ANC has fallen out of power simply because there was a group of ANC members within the, of ANC members, yes, who were actually acting within the ANC with the core center, Ramaphosa Center. These ones, they've actually been marginalized. And now they decided to go out of the ANC, Central ANC, to form their MK party. And these are the people who have actually dropped the ANC. The ANC is where it was because of this new group which has come up under Jacob Zuma. And there is still room for this party of Jacob Zuma and the Central ANC to come together. But there's a conditionality that Ramaphosa has got to go. So basically, the ANC is just nothing more than the DA is nothing. It has not brought anything on the table. Yeah. It is just they've taken advantage of the split that has taken place within the ANC. Now, there's another issue. When people talk about ideology and policy and of running the country, basically there's one thing that people should know, that the ANC or the political parties, they do not have much say when it comes to the economy. The South African economy is being run by the private sector. The private sector has got full control of the economy. The state has got nothing. But then there is a very big clash between the private sector, what they call the white monopoly capital or the whatever it is, with the ANC. The capital, the capital, as they call it here in South Africa, I don't know if people understand it outside South Africa, capital actually wants the ANC or the government to come and tighten laws that surround the administration and the control of the trade unions. And they want a freer hand in the way that they would be able to deal with labor. And in that respect, what capital has done, it has actually not coming on board by actually coming to grow the economy. Because the only sector that can grow the economy, it is the private sector. This was well put by ex-President Thabo Mbeki a few years ago, when he talked about the difficulty that they had in dealing with the private sector. That South Africa is a country that is actually operates on a neoliberal economic principle, and the whole economy is in the hands of the private sector. Now, they were trying to attract the private sector to come and grow the economy by investment. And they were approaching the foreign investors. But after some time, the foreign investors told me, but why are you coming to us? When you've got your local investors, because of these people, they've made profits that they've never, ever actually had. The private sector of South Africa, they have made millions in profits. But these people have not come up to play ball, to come and invest and grow the economy. Now, which is the truth? Yeah. But the South African private sector, they want the government to come up heavily on the trade unions and to allow them more space when it comes to the neoliberal economic things. So they're basically blackmailing the government. So Ramaphosa, he is part and parcel of the mining houses. He's the miner. He's a billionaire. In fact, he's an oligarch. That's a new issue in African politics. Yeah. We as Africans have got to wake up. Let us not talk about this egalitarian politics. Right now, our politics has been political parties, organizations, they've been taken over by oligarchs. It's all over. It's like that in Zambia, it's like that in the DRC, it's like that in Benin. It's like that anywhere. These oligarchs, they're actually there to look after the interests of capital. Yeah? And so basically, right now, the Ramaphosas, they are there with the private sector. They are part and parcel of it. So basically, being there with the DA, it is actually a thing that they want and they like. Yeah. Ramaphosa will never work with other black parties. And the DA is also important because the DA is coming on board with just about how many seats? It's coming on board with about 87 seats or 21%. Yet the ANC, if they could sit together with NK and the EFF, they will get the majority. And they'll get the majority of over 66% when they can change the constitution. So basically, there's a lot of politics which has been played, but basically, this is the politics of all the oligarchs versus the populists. And the oligarchs are winning, as they're winning all over the African continent. The oligarchs are actually taking over the African continent. The mining magnates that are working with the politicians who are billionaires, and they're actually one and the same thing as the Western European capitals. Okay. It's there in Ivory Coast and everywhere. It's there for people to see. That's the reality of African politics. People have got to wake up. What is taking place in South Africa is taking place all over Africa.
Oh, thank you so much, Mr. IZAK, for the great insight, which further brings us now to the question of governance. Coming back to you, Fidel, when we listen to Mr. IZAK, we now see that both the African National Congress and the Democratic Alliance believe somehow that the private sector can still development in the country. Let's look at the feasibility of this and also the prospect of good governance in the new coalition government for the total transformation of South Africa that will check corruption, unemployment, and other problems affecting the country.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting discussion, and I would like to address a number of issues. Firstly, when Prof was giving that excellent submission, he mentioned that South Africa, when it comes to policy and what their problems, they know it very well. And it's something I really doubt, because South Africa in the past few years has not lived up to expectation. In fact, is one of the, if you talk of crime, is one of the topmost in the world in terms of crime, murder, crime. Every now and then we find people getting drive-by shooting, people being killed, the drug epidemics, drug laws running amok. South Africa has a lot of problems. In terms of corruption, South Africa in these past years, we found President Zuma going in and out of court, being jailed. The current president is having to answer for some things. For the first time, South Africa and I think Egypt or Ethiopia, I think Egypt, in the economy, yeah, population is bigger, Egypt's population is bigger, but South Africa, if it has done things right, would have still maintained the lead for some time. Because, for instance, you take South Korea. South Korea had independence almost at the same time that African countries were having independence. Barring South Africa, because then we can't talk of apartheid. But at the end of the day, South Korea has less population, but the economy, because they're able to run it. And South Africa is the most industrialized country in Africa. But you see the economy dwindling. It means that something is going on wrong in that country. And it's something that must be admitted. Things are going wrong because of unemployment. That South Africans will attack their fellow Africans, African migrants, because they are not given jobs, and they think that foreigners are taking their jobs. This means things are wrong in that country. Now, a coalition. Coalitions in Europe and other places, coalition failed. So when South Africa was subscribing to this proportional representation, it was anticipating that it will get there. When it fails, you form another coalition. But it looks like because ANC had dominated the politics since 1994, people were taking things for granted, like, well, it's coalition, it's a proportional representation, but ANC is dominant. This is real proportional representation, and making it work will show the difference.
Absolutely.
So even if it fails, you still must have another. If fresh elections need to be held, it must be held. After all, when ANC was still dominant, we found Jacob Zuma not finishing his second term, Thabo Mbeki not finishing his second term.
Indeed.
So what is the difference? What difference does it make? So it means that the coalition government, what it needs is that it benefits the people. It makes people more accountable than having a single party and politicians who feel that they are dominant and they are the people who call the shot and all that. So be it. It benefits South Africa. If it decides that, well, they are supporting it, then it has its also ramifications. So that is very, very much important. Now, the issue of private sector. In fact, I don't know of any country where the government currently in Africa or the world where the government sector is leading and is driving growth.
Yeah.
Maybe North Korea. Maybe North Korea is the country that where government sector is leading growth. You see, so sometimes the pragmatism of these things must also be discussed. The issue is the creation of jobs. Governments must put in measures that allow the private sector to create jobs for people to have.
Absolutely.
The international system is designed such that the private sector is what drives growth. And even in Nigeria, which recently surpassed South Africa in GDP, it's the private sector. We found Dangote, a private individual who has built a refinery for people in Nigeria to get jobs or find jobs to do. So it's nothing to do with whether the private sector is dominating or not. It has to do with government being more responsible. If the private sector is big and government can do the right taxation in order to provide safety nets for the vulnerable in society, that is the work of government. But any government that comes and says that institutions must be nationalized or companies must be nationalized is not realistic. When states with the experience we've had in Africa in the 60s, in the 70s, that when states own properties, what happens is that people who believe that they have political influence, dominate these institutions, engage in unnecessary nepotism, corruption, and other activities that in the long term affect society or affect the country. So what needs to be done is strong government control that does not allow the private sector to actually exploit the people. Yeah. Good labor law, good bargaining, collective bargaining, and things like that. Okay. That is what South Africa needs. And it is these. Do you want to come in?
Yes, I just want to interject a bit with a question, since you're elaborating on the private sector, you know, given the present geopolitical contestation and the role sometimes, well, you know, private sector looking at multinationals that come to Africa in the form of, you know, increasing or promoting foreign direct investment. And at the end, we see that this is actually wrecking the country rather than solving some of the economic problems that the nation has. And now we look at the DA and the ANC in their coalition. Let's try to relate how this with the international agenda can impact the situation in South Africa.
Yes, so you are talking about multinationals.
Absolutely,
now, if you talk about private sector and you talk of multinationals, you are talking about one aspect of a whole thing. No, multinationals form part of the private sector. But we also have locals or youth who want to be active in the private sector. Youth which are innovative. In South Africa, I know a number of youth who have been very innovative, have had startup, and they are doing very well. These guys need to be supported. That is the private sector. So if FDI is coming in, FDI, that is foreign direct investment, may come by way of other investments in mining sector, energy sector, and things like that. This needs good regulation in order not to become a burden on the state or on the people. That is the job of government. Now, you don't allow politicians to say that we are nationalizing that, we are nationalizing this, and at the end of the day, end up benefiting from it at the expense of the people. We've seen it all across Africa. There are a lot of literature that, I mean, explains some of these exploitation across Africa. Now, with the issue of the coalition, what is important is that what is important is that everybody on board needs to see that what is the way forward for South Africa. They talk about it, they compromise, they build, brainstorm, compromise, and then implement what is good. If the government collapses today, another one is formed. And that, as long as it is transparent, it is better than one party being there and we seeing corruption every day and nothing happening. In fact, if there's going to be an election or they have to vote on impeaching President Ramaphosa, that is going to be a waste of everyone's time, and it's a result of what? Corruption. So when you have different parties coming together, it helps. That is the essence of, as I mentioned earlier, the proportional representation. That is its essence. It is not about one party dominating. And it is good that people within the ANC have found that, well, ideologically, we identify with the far left. So we are leaving. EFF left, Jacob Zuma has left. And these are people who know the internal ins and outs of the party. And so the danger, I don't see it coming from the DA. The danger comes from those who have left the party and knows its ins and outs and can perhaps get in and exploit or take advantage of some of the differences in order to weaken the ANC. That is the real danger for the ANC and not the DA. You know the DA already. The DA has been there for a long time. If it was impossible to form a coalition, it wouldn't have been formed. And as Mr. KHOMO mentioned, they are all centrists, and they may find common grounds more than the leftists who were in the far left, who were within the ANC. So this is some of the intricacies that needs to be discussed. Because when we simplify it to look like, well, if a coalition collapses, then it means that there's a problem for the country. No. Coalitions collapse the world over. And still, in Israel, someone resigned from the government and the coalition has collapsed. There's supposed to be another government that is supposed to be formed. That is the essence of proportional representation. Other than that, South Africa can decide to go majoritarian, but that is not the case. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Just to remind our televiewers that this is Global Insight on For You Media, a discursive program where we bring greater insight into the happenings across the world, particularly defining the place of Africa. We continue to look at it in the economic perspective with you, Professor NUBONG. We're looking at the coalition with a party headed by a businessman, that is the Democratic Alliance. So now we will look at the role of, how this will affect the current economic situation in South Africa, and will play a role in the formation of, political alliances and the existing government. And how does this impact the working, or how will this impact the working class and the youth population in South Africa as well?
Well, Clarice, I think that just to build on what the former panelist said, yeah. South Africa has challenges, and I think that for the rest of Africa, we need to understand that the repetition of some of the challenges is not because there are no policies in place to address them. Africa needs to come to terms with the fact that the challenges that South Africa has cannot be fixed overnight. It's issues around structural transformation of the economy. It's issues around being able to get the productivity up of the economy. The challenge with South Africa, even as you talked about the GDP, is that the South African economy has attained a stage of maturity in economic development that is driven by the tertiary sector. So 60–70% of the GDP of South Africa comes from the services industry, finances industry, services industries, and the banks. That is the largest side, bulk of the South African economy. Not from mining, not from agriculture, not from manufacturing. 60–70%. And that is a sector that is intensive in the usage of skilled labor. The reason why South Africa is not able to address its 40% unemployment rate is not because it does not have policies. It's just because of the nature of global markets and because of the nature of the resource endowment of South Africa as a country, it cannot attain or achieve rapid industrialization via manufacturing, which has typically been found to drive growth in employment across the world. As much as pays lip service to it and says it wants to do that, it just doesn't have the capability of doing that. South Africa's export is largely raw materials, largest producers of gold and platinum and all of that. And those are extractive sectors that are principally, they just dig out of the ground, dump on the ship and send to the rest of the world. That's the nature of the South African economy at the moment. And parties like the DA, and this is where the interaction between the economics and the politics comes in. For that sector to be transformed, to become, for it to become employment intensive, and I'm talking about a natural resource driven industrialization project, the ownership structure of mining needs to change. The owners of mining that are currently part of the political process, including President Cyril himself, are large-scale multinationals that have headquarters sitting in London and in Australia and in the financial capitals of the world. They approach South Africa as a resource provider. They do not have a fundamental benefit. From a cost-benefit perspective, they have no direct interest in their being beneficiation and transformation of South Africa's minerals in South Africa. Whereas from an employment creation perspective, that's what the country needs. Now, when these people who are, by the way, the owners of the mines at the moment and are sponsoring large political parties like the DA get hold of power, they're the ones that talk about the private sector-driven agenda. And private sector-driven agenda says that you should let private sector to determine the priorities of and the policies of the country. But it is not to their interest for there to be beneficiation and large-scale manufacturing. That, from the perspective of a developmental state, as seen from the experience in Asia and the rest of the world, is something that only the government does. And that is where you have these divergences of policies about people talking about nationalization of mines. Nationalization of mines is not just a disruptive, I want to be in charge of the government policy of the EFF or some of these parties. It's done out of the understanding that the ownership of the mines at the moment does not belong to the government, does not belong to the people. The mine bosses are owned by private sector, by private individuals and shareholders. And what they did in 1994 was to bring people like President Cyril Ramaphosa, bring in people like the current president of CAF, Patrice Motsepe, bring in all the big names that you know on the continent and get them shares in this mine. And since they get them shares in the mine, they have been using the deep pockets that they have to control national politics. That is the frustration of the MK. That is the frustration of the EFF. That is the frustration of the black majority. The fact that on the one hand, we are painting this picture of a national unity that involves South Africa is a rainbow nation that involves everybody who lives there. And on the other hand, the owners of capital and the owners of resources are involved in the political process to shape the narrative, to direct economic policy in the direction that is to their best interest. Now, but that is democracy and that's the way it functions. And that is what explains this current government of national unity, because you have a mining boss as the head of the state that has shares in the mining industry, who has to make economic and political decisions and national decisions in the interest of the country, but bearing in mind that him and his shareholders will be affected by the choices that he makes. That is the real thing that is going on behind the scenes. That is frustrating a whole range of people. And that's what I'm saying, that private sector involvement is good, it's positive, but it should be done within the context of the transfer of the resources, first of all, to national ownership. Then we can regulate the engagement of the private sector as it is done all over the world. There's very few economies anywhere in the world where the people who own the private resources are also the people who are in government, like we currently have now, you know, in the context of President Cyril Ramaphosa. So that's the one thing. Now, as far as the formulation of policy is concerned, we do not anticipate, I personally don't anticipate there are going to be big shifts. There will be no big shift because the coalition and
unfortunately, we lost Professor NUBONG. Of course, we're going to continue with the analysis with you, Mr. IZAK KHOMO. We are looking at the complexities. Let's try to, you know, leave the internal discrepancies and understand the greater stakes of it. We're looking at the coalition of different political parties, which actually have different global alignments. How does the ANC's relationship with global powers and of course the stance on international aspects, especially the conflict in the Middle East, the ones rocking Ukraine, impact its domestic policies and the already formed coalition, the other parties in Qatar Party, among others?
Referring to foreign policy.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll get to that. Yeah, but one thing I've got to say is that for the first time I agree totally with Professor NUBONG. Professor NUBONG has hit the nail on the, yeah, he has hit the nail on the head. Basically, what is happening is this, that the South African economy, basically, it is not in the hands of government, it's in the hands of the private sector. And again, he was right when he says that the biggest economic sector, it is the service industry. Now, the service industry does not create new wealth. It actually comes and gets all of wealth which is there. It does not create new wealth. It never has. The service industry, it is manufacturing that can create new wealth. And the owners of manufacturing are interested in that not only in South Africa, they're not interested in that in Nigeria, they're not interested in that in the DRC. Yeah? In fact, when you talk of corruption, the private sector is more corrupt. South Africa, we talk of corruption, we're talking about state corruption. With state corruption, the corruption is there, that is true. But then when you come and look at the private sector corruption, it is there, but it's underground. Yeah, but I won't go into that. Now let's come and talk about, let's let's come and talk about foreign policy. Now, the foreign policy of South Africa, when it comes to international matters, is a thing that people are really worried. Is this that will the new government with Ramaphosa in power be able to come and stick with the ANC, the former ANC foreign policy? And we've still got to wait and see. Because basically, if you look at the DA, basically the DA, the Democratic Alliance, it is a party which came not only from the apartheid party, the party which had apartheid, the Nationalist Party, but it was actually a party of the Jewish population and the Jewish industrial population. The Jews of Anglo-American, the Jews of Glencoe, the Jews of all the industries, the industries of South Africa are basically Jews. And they came and formed this party, not of the DA. Right now you find that the DA and the ANC, they are actually at loggerheads when it comes to issues like Israel and the Gaza. But now you find that Ramaphosa, his business partners in South Africa and also out of South Africa, it is the same Jewish mining and financial entity. Now, where will the South African foreign policy go to with Ramaphosa? Glencoe are people who are actually controlling the mining of South Africa now. They're controlling the mining in the DRC. They're controlling the mining almost over all these other areas in the African continent. But people are not aware of that. And these people, they're really corrupt. What is happening with all the mining companies in Africa is this, that these big mining companies, when they come and mine, they mine and they sell what they mine to the offshore companies, subsidiaries. And they sell the thing to the subsidiaries at a reduced cost, at a reduced price. And those minerals are actually stockpiled. And once they're stockpiled, they're released to the open market very slowly, and at a very high cost, whereby the states, the African states have accumulated or have taken their taxes at false rates. But the real profits which are taking place when these offshore subsidiaries sell it to the international market, those profits also accrue to the African countries. That's what is happening with the DRC. That's what is happening with all the countries. That's what is happening to all the Saharan countries with their gold and their business with the French. That's what's happening to Ivory Coast. But then Ramaphosa is part and parcel of this. He was in charge of a company which was actually caught doing the same thing. Is he prepared to change the situation? Professor NUBONG was right. Basically, with the developmental state, the state has got to actually, with the developmental policy, the state has got to play a very important part. We're talking about South Korea. South Korea, the whole economy of South Korea was built by the state being part and parcel of that economic drive. It is well said by this South Korean economist who was a professor at Oxford University, or was it Cambridge, with his book, The Bad Samaritans. He points out that all these countries which have actually had great progress, even Japan, they had a lot of state intervention. South Africa, the state has got nothing to do with the economy. Even if they're going to change their policies, as Mr. OWUSU said, change the policies to what? To attract who? In fact, South Africa is the most liberal country when it comes to economic policy. It's more liberal than any country, yet the guys are not even prepared. They're just coming here to suck and let's just move on. They answered that all that they could from Mandela's time. That's what Thabo Mbeki is complaining about. That private sector has not come on board as a partner. South Africa has privatized all the mineral wealth of the government is in the hands of the government. It's Sasol, be it telecom, the connectivity to people. And these are big industries, be it the mines, the big mines which are under ISCO. South Africa's got 80% of the world's manganese. That has been privatized. And what have the people done? They've got 80% of the South African minerals, manganese. Yet they've done nothing to come and invest and grow the economy. So let us be very careful when you talk about this neoliberal or the liberal economy of Mr. OWUSU saying that we've got to do this to attract capital, to attract everything. These guys they're driving us down. And Africans, we as Africans, we are foolish. I'm sorry to say so. And not only that, the Europeans know it. Because basically we've got the minerals. And what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to form a cartel. Africans are supposed to form cartels over the mineral resources, just as OPEC did it with oil. And in the cartels, we control the things from mining to marketing. That's when you're going to make real profit. But without that, you're going to be nowhere. The Europeans will never come to actually help Africa out of its problems. Never.
Indeed, African solutions to African problem, we need a strong and intentional political will that will come from particularly the main stakeholders, who are the political stakeholders. Coming back to you, Fidel, also, while talking earlier on, you pointed out that a coalition can fail and of course can work in the coming days or months, and you highlighted that if the coalition in South Africa doesn't work, the problem should primarily be coming from the ruling ANC, because those revolting are actually members of the ANC that understands the innermost circle and how things can work to be able to maintain peace and ensure the continuity of the government. The question is, with all of these complexities already highlighted, let's look at the decision of former President Jacob Zuma. He was talking some days ago, highlighting that he doesn't trust the justice system in South Africa, and he's taking the petition to the International Court. And I think here we're looking at either the International Court of Justice or the ICC. But now let's look at the complexities still surrounding these international institutions, given that lately the chief prosecutor of the ICC noted that the court was created to pursue African leaders and the likes like Russian President Vladimir Putin. With the current political, discrepancies in South Africa, do you think it's a wise decision as an international expert to take these internal aspects to international court? Will it serve the interest of South Africans? Please, Fidel, I can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was saying that when I first heard the thing, I didn't see the head and tail of his argument, because this has to do with internal elections and you having some problems with the way it went, and you want to take it to court. And you are talking of international court. It's quite confusing, because the ICC was not created to solve such problems, election problems. Neither was the ICJ, International Court of Justice, also created for that purpose. However, the SADC and other regional courts exist, like African courts and other things that are sometimes, in terms of human rights issues, handle some of these issues. But when it comes to substantive issues, mostly they deal with cases between states and war criminals. That's what we know the ICC and the ICJ to be doing. So, and I'm not surprised that President Zuma is a very good politician when it comes to the local politics of South Africa, but he is not that sophisticated when it comes to international issues, that I know. So that is not surprising. However, you also mentioned the previous question, which I would like to address because of my background, about what these elections means for the foreign policy direction of South Africa.
Absolutely.
If you permit me to answer this.
Absolutely.
Now,
of course you can.
Yes. You know, Ukraine, South Africa was very much more of a pacifist in Ukraine. President Ramaphosa led the delegation of African leaders that went to Kyiv and Moscow to seek peace, and specifically because of the ramifications of the war on Africa, especially the importation of wheat and other food and other grains that is very important for Africa. It's very unfortunate that despite our huge arable lands, we still have to depend on grain coming from the Black Sea, but that was the case, that we had to go to them to speak with them. But it didn't result in anything. And if you looked very well in Palestine or Israel, the Israeli-Palestinian issue, recently South Africa actually took Israel to the International Court of Justice. And that is very unprecedented, and it was a step that many supported across the continent. Now, with the DA, I don't see the DA changing. And before I come to that, much of the foreign policy of South Africa, or the ANC-led South African government, was as a result of the apartheid politics around the world. The Palestinian PLA under Yasser Arafat was one of the vociferous and open supporters of, liberation of South Africa. They had spoken against apartheid, and he was very emphatic and very consistent. And President Mandela would say that during those days, the people who showed up are the people going forward South Africa are going to identify with as their allies. And so ANC taking Israel to court was consistent with that policy, and which was, by all standards, good. Now, if you consider the Ukraine, in fact, many in the West saw South Africa to be hobnobbing with Russia, and therefore said that, well, if during apartheid South Africa was, or the blacks in South Africa were victims, then Ukrainians are victims of Russia. But that is another debatable topic. But currently, I don't see the DA changing so much the foreign policy direction of South Africa. And this is the reason. The DA having that 22% vote in the last elections is actually a key maker, but not a leader. And so it is going to be careful not to rock the boat too much, especially in the foreign policy arena. It is going to concentrate on how to cautiously walk the delicate walk, the political walk in South Africa, in order to maximize its support in the next round of elections. That is what the DA is going to concentrate on. So the DA is going to look like somebody, a body that is more conscious about the internal politics of South Africa rather than the foreign policy of the country. And that is very important, because if you look at South Africa, the domestic issues, as my previous speakers have spoken and have said, are more pressing than what is without. And so whether it is the ICJ or is the ICC, I don't see the DA playing so much role in that. And again, Mr. Nkomo was right that when it comes to Mr. Nkomo was right that when it came to foreign policy, the economy, you needed. Sorry about that. I need to fix a problem. Okay, so when it came to the, sorry about that. When it came to the economy, it is very important for government to play a role, and he was right. It is very important, but the government must not own assets like trying to nationalize companies and running it as a state. It must create the environment, and that was what happened in Japan and the South Korea that he's talking about, and that is what I advocate for. Government has no business running business. They almost always fail. In fact, currently, Cuba is allowing privatization. A country like Cuba that had for decades toward the line of communism is now opening up. So definitely government must play a role, but it must be regulatory, and it must try to create a fair environment for the private sector to compete and produce the necessary goods for the greater good. And that is what is important. And as I said, the government is there to tax in order to create or sponsor the safety net for the weak or then the vulnerable in society. Thank you very much.
For the greater insider, we are rounding off already, but we'll go with this question looking at the prospect for the coalition government, and how can the existing tension coming particularly from revolting opposition parties be quelled to put the interest of South African first. Coming to you, Mr. IZAK KHOMO, what do you think should be the modus operandi of these coalition governments to make it work for South Africans?
What do you mean?
Hello, Mr. IZAK, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay.
Basically, what is going to happen, there is nothing much that this coalition can do which is going to actually have any magic. The thing that is going to happen, that people are saying, that very serious political analysts are saying, is this that with this coalition, what will happen is this that the DA will actually come up and force the government to come and push very drastic laws which are going to emasculate the trade unions and the labor sector. What the DA wants and what the sector wants is actually for a government to implement those laws which were implemented by Margaret Thatcher, which came and went and literally neutralized the labor sector. Now that's where we are going. We are going for a very big showdown between the government and the labor sector, the labor union. Okay. Now that is in the pipeline, and I do not know what is going to happen. There is nothing that is going to happen there that the government is going to do something to revive the economy or to actually encourage the economy to grow. The ball is in the hands of the private sector, and that is it. And truly speaking, I totally disagree with Mr. Fidel saying that the government has got no role in industrialization. It has got a very big role. The government in South Korea played a very important role when it came to establish the steel industries and also the shipbuilding industry. They were party and they actually put their capital. Go and read the book which is called, go and read the book which has been written by a South Korean, The Bad, I forgot the name. But go and read the book. It will actually tell you exactly what is happening. Yeah? The people are kicking the ladder. The ladder that
kicking the ladder, Hajung-chan.
Yeah, Hajung-chan, exactly. Huh? So that is the thing. The only thing that the government has got no role. That is in trouble because of that. The state has got a role, but once the role, everything has been set, you move out. The Europeans, the Bretton Woods institutions, they force African countries to remove subsidies on African agriculture. We had a very young agriculture, a niche agriculture, which is peasant-based, small scale, and it was coming up properly. With structural adjustment, they were forced to actually remove subsidies. And they did so. We had to come and import fertilizer from outside at a real cost. But yet the same countries which are forced to remove subsidies, they subsidize the agriculture by over 330 billion US dollars per annum, which is over 1 billion per working day. What nonsense is that? And they're going to tell you about neoliberal economic and thing.
Okay.
They're still subsidizing agriculture. Africa is in problems. They're going to have a food crisis. Our agriculture has collapsed because all our inputs are imported. Where they were subsidized for the state that they were supposed not to be subsidized. And they come with arguments that you are putting forward. Oh, the government is supposed to do this, do that. They don't talk about that. They subsidize straight away. They subsidize straight away. As the Chinese are crying now when they say that with the electronic cars, they say, but the Europe actually does subsidize the formation of their industries. When the industries are being formed,
Okay.
they can subsidize by the European states.
Please,
But you cannot do it.
sir.
Let us be very careful. Let us be very careful when we talk about this neoliberalism.
Okay.
As Africans, these whites are really despising us because we can't think.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. IZAK KHOMO, for the great insight. I think we are going to round off with you, Professor NUBONG. Just 1 minute before we draw the curtains into the program.
Comments of Mr. KHOMO.
Hello.
I can just say the rest of Africa. Can you hear me?
Yes, I
just
can
say to the
hear
rest
you.
of Africa, South Africa, we're in a very difficult position. And for the rest of our African analysts, look a little bit closer. A lot of what is happening is not as it's presented to the rest of the world. Our issues are very deep, much more deeper than I even think this administration or GNA is going to solve in 5 years. When you listen keenly to Mr. KHOMO and you hear some of the arguments we are making, you'll realize that there's pent-up frustration out of the fact that we are not addressing the real issues. Attention is being diverted to superficial issues and accusations of corruption here and there and people wanting to nationalize and take over government. So the narrative is being skewed to focus attention on the issues that are not the issues. And that is problematic because when you get people to focus on the issues that are not the issues, you would leave them with one alternative to take the battle to the streets. And we don't want to get there. So we hope sanity is going to prevail, and we ultimately are going to come back to the point where we would address the issue that has to do with changing the condition of the material condition of the average person on the ground, the post-apartheid structure of the country. When you walk around and you drive around the country, there are still settlements filled with citizens that vote like everybody else, whose life has not changed since 1994. And the new liberal market policies that the GNU is proposing together with their partnership with the DA is unlikely to address these fundamental issues. And strange enough, the people who have the courage to address the issues that will affect the average man who is speaking the language in spite of the colorful past that they come with are the people that are being indexed as dangerous and as evil, and that is problematic because if you silence the voices of the people of the Malemas and the Zumas of the world, you would let the people take the emotions to the street, and we don't want to get to that point. So let's hope for the best and pray for the best. But thanks so much for having us on this platform, Clarice.
Thank you so much, Professor NUBONG. We, of course, are appreciating you, the panel of experts that gave insight and more understanding to the narratives in South Africa. We appreciate your time and for trusting for you, Media Africa, as we continue to discuss the African cause to see how we can be intentional about bringing African solutions to African problems. Thank you again, gentlemen, for the great insight. And to our viewers out there, we appreciate your time and the technical crew for the smooth run of the program. We want to draw this curtain by wishing you all a wonderful moment as you stay in the company of programs on For You Media Africa. Bye-bye.